It's IB Countdown to Kickoff. We're getting ready. Notre Dame and Louisville. The gang's all here. Sean Stiers, Jesse Stiers, Vince D'Addario. We are off. We are rolling, kicking this thing off. Well, I don't think any of us anticipated last week being what it was with Notre Dame's come from behind win over Duke. I started to say heartbreaking, heartbreaker of a win, maybe, heartbreaking for Duke this time. Let me just start. We're on a little bit of a time crunch, so there's no time to dibble dabble and dawdle and anything else today. Where does 4th and 16, Jesse, starting with you, where does it rank for you over the last 20 years in terms of plays for the Fighting Irish?
So I think that, that you start looking at some of their bigger games and some of those critical, moments, and it's hard to kind of remember exactly all of them. But I think that in terms of this season, it's a huge turning point for Notre Dame just because of, you had the emotional loss to Ohio State the week before. And then obviously when you're coming into Duke, it's another night game. You're a little shorthanded on offense, and you didn't execute as much as you want on offense. But with your back against the wall, the team found a way to win. And that's the most important part to me. That's the part that sticks with everyone. That's what you're judged off of if you win. And no one really cares how you win. No one's going to look three weeks down the road when Notre Dame's playing a different opponent and say, Notre Dame only won that game, on a last-second drive to seal it. But it's a huge moment out in the season because it's that turning point. It's the difference between still staying in one loss and staying in contention, and not falling down to 2 losses. So I find it as this season definitely huge and critical. And then when you start thinking of it all time, I'm trying to think of some of those like critical moments in other games. Like it's not as like, like the one I always think of is like the Bush push game that was super close. Some of those moments in the
but like
game.
this one goes in Notre Dame's favor, and that's
right.
It is
And I'm
it
trying
is
to
harder.
think of
Like the only two that stand out to me, and Vince, I'll let you kind of jump in here.
Yeah, I think I know where you're going with this.
The two that stand out to me in terms of importance, a little bit different, but the goal line stand against Stanford, keeping Stanford out in the rain in 2012.
Yep.
And then in terms of dramatic offensive ending, I think it's like Samardzija and UCLA. Quinn to Samardzija.
Oh, you know what? I just thought of
UCLA.
one.
Go ahead, Jess, if you've got one.
What Deshaun Kaiser dropping it in to beat Syracuse.
That's a good one.
Oh, or even Virginia.
Yeah,
Virginia.
Like
sorry,
against Virginia.
The orange confused me.
Deshaun Kaiser to Will Fuller. Virginia. That's a good one.
Yeah. I think that's the best comparison now that I think of it, because
they should not even have been in that game. Like that.
Yep.
Like Virginia should not have been in that game. And then, but you figure the injury to the quarterback and everything that went on. Yeah, that's a really good comparison. Would be the Virginia game, because that's one they shouldn't have lost, right? Like
shouldn't have been that close, and that's how I felt about Duke. Shouldn't have been that close, but I felt that Notre Dame was still going to win and be the better team.
And the first one I thought of was Stanford. Obviously, if we're thinking about Notre Dame on the positive side of things, the first one I thought about was Stanford, no doubt about it, because but Stanford was deeper than that, because there was still an issue for Brian Kelly and Stanford. Like they couldn't beat Stanford. Mm-hmm. Stanford was like the dragon they couldn't slay, and
the implications.
That was like a huge win, and then that win got even bigger because it propelled them to the undefeated season, right? I mean, and that was, they had some close calls in that season, obviously, but that moment right there is the one you remember when you're thinking, okay, they were undefeated 12-0 in that season. Why were they undefeated? That goal line stand right there with defense. You know what I mean? Like that, that kind of encapsulates the whole season. So it's like, I wonder, how this season's going to play out. Do we look back at this particular game and think that's kind of the game that springboarded them into the rest of the season? A lot of big games to come, obviously, but if they lost that game, like Jesse said, they're done. Like it's over. Season's done. You're praying for a New Year's Six at that point. Like season's over. And they beat a team they should have beat by more, no doubt about it. The manner in which they did it was fantastic. But does this springboard them, or do they stay kind of right there and lose to some teams they shouldn't lose to. I don't know.
That's the thing. They do still have some things to figure out. I still fall back on. We probably didn't give Duke. I know we didn't give Duke nearly enough credit defensively. I mean, they showed they were a really good defensive team. That defense is legit. Mike Elko did some things in that game. Could Notre Dame have countered? We obviously think that they could have in some different ways that they didn't. Jared Parker's kind of talked about that this week. Maybe he needs to be able to adjust a little bit more in game. And I think that that's the biggest thing. Probably the biggest question for him right now is how he adjusts. But, again, like in terms of a 4th and 16, we were talking about it earlier in the week. And, what are we going to call it? What do you call this thing? And like you heard in that video, Gino Gaduli, he ran for it on 4th and 16. Amazing. It's like, I just think it's going to be called 4th and 16. That's how people remember it. I don't think it needs, like the Sam Shuffle or any of that kind of stuff. We've had some suggestions this week. I just think it's going to be 4th and 16, and it was just an amazing heads-up play by Sam Hartman to be able to convert that.
It was.
Where do you think Notre Dame would be right now if they didn't have Sam Hartman, if it was Tyler Buckner or Drew Pine at quarterback instead?
Not where they are now. It just wouldn't be. Like, we can all agree that Sam Hartman had his worst game against Duke. There's no two ways about it. I think, part of that was him. He had some accuracy issues, but part of it was the offensive line. I mean, he had pressure in his face all day, and I think that made him gun shy a little bit as well because he knew that he wasn't really hitting his mark, and he wasn't able to really sit in there and throw the ball. I wonder if he was more on in the Duke game, like maybe he throws that ball on 4th and 16. He had Rico Flores. It looked like he kind of pumped at one point, I think, for somebody. But then he decided to tuck it. He's like, I'm just going to go.
That kind of helped him as well. The fact that Flores was sitting there, it kind of froze those two defenders. He had a safety over the top, as we were talking about, safety over the top in the corner down low. And I think it kind of froze them because, I'm sure they didn't know exactly where Hartman was in correlation to the line of scrimmage and when he could go. So
they had no clue. They had no faith that he was going to run the ball on 4th and 16. Nobody did. Nobody did. Like, I was yelling at my TV, like, no, you got to throw it. You can't run. Like, I think everybody was doing that, right? And so I think they were frozen in shock as well based on what went down. So, look, they would be in dire straits because, number one, I don't think they have the games that they have the first 4 games. They probably win them, but I don't know that they win them in the manner that they did. And, do they still lose to Ohio State? There's no doubt about that. And I don't think with the way the team played as a whole that they win that game against Duke.
Yeah, Vince, you brought up a lot of good points there. Notre Dame was playing chess with Duke on Saturday. It was a defensive chess battle between Elko. Well, I know it's not Elko's defense, but it largely has a lot of influence from Elko and then, Al Golden. And so you start looking at, to me, that was potentially kind of the eight toughest stretch of quarters that Notre Dame's going to face defensively this year, right? Between Ohio State and Duke's defense. I really think that those are two of the top defenses that they're going to see all year, and they put them back to back. And so you start kind of looking at, how Sam Hartman did and how that would stack up to Buckner or Pine. And, you kind of said, I think that Buckner or Pine can navigate through Navy, Tennessee State. I think NC State is a little bit of a closer game, like a one-score grinded-out type victory. I don't think Central Michigan would have been, how we've seen some of those MAC games play out at home. Would have probably won, but we would have probably complained about how close of a finish it was. And then, like you said, I don't think Pine and Buckner. I don't think that they would have stood a shot against Ohio State and Duke back-to-back. So I think we'd be looking at like a 4-2 team at best here, coming off 2 losses in a row. And there would be some little bit of hysteria or anything. So that would be my interpretation there.
I agree. I think that they're probably 4-2 at best. The NC State game is much more of a grinder, and it might have looked like last week's NC State Louisville game for that matter. And I think that's a toss-up at best. They could very easily be a 500 team right now if you don't have Sam Hartman. So, as great as things looked early on, they are in a little bit different place right now, especially just in terms of what we perceive of this team coming out of this 2-week definitely grinder between Ohio State and Duke. How differently do you think that everyone would feel right now? How differently would you feel if Notre Dame had beaten Ohio State, which, everyone wanted, of course, but then you come back and lost a close game to Duke because they were right down to the wire, both games. They ended up doing it the other way around. But how differently would everyone feel if it had gone the other way and they win the Buckeye game, but they lose to the Blue Devils?
Yeah, I think that there would be even
Are you waking people up in the court? Jesse's in a courtyard of a hotel out there. Right. Are you waking people up from the courtyard, or like people coming out and telling you to be quiet?
Well, this person just like randomly came to the window and was like, shh. And I was like, well, I'm not that loud, but I'll try to whisper here a little bit. Not whisper, but I have these noise canceling headphones, so I'm going to try to talk just a little bit lower here. But if Notre Dame loses to Duke after beating Ohio State, I think the main thing that we would be saying is, the trap game. How did they respond after winning the big one? And to me, it almost would feel kind of worse at the end of the day, right? If you beat a team like Ohio State and then turn around and lose to Duke. So I just think that, how things played out, you don't want to lose, but if you're going to lose in the manner they did, I think it makes them hungrier for the rest of the season, right? But if you beat Ohio State and start losing to teams less to them, you start falling into, trapdoor games and people being a little bit more upset, in my opinion.
I think Marcus Freeman is being skewered if they win Ohio State, which would be a huge win, obviously. And he would have been getting all the flowers, at that point. But then you turn around and you lose to Duke. You know what we would have been hearing? We would have been hearing Marshall all over again. Now, Duke is 1,000 times better than Marshall. 1,000 times better. So you can't really compare the two, but the comparison is the week after a big game. And if he loses that game in 2 consecutive years, people are like, he's not ready to be a head coach. You're going to hear all of that all week long. That's the difference.
And I mean, let's be honest, he's already getting some of that, and they beat Duke.
Yeah.
So, and it's there are a lot of important things to remember. I think, like they played the Duke game without two of their top receivers, and like we talked about, Sam Hartman didn't have that great a game against Duke, but one of his receivers who was, coming into the season was supposed to be the dog, had 3 drops in that game, 3 crucial drops. I wouldn't say all 3 of them were crucial, but at least 2 of them.
Still want them to catch them. They may not be crucial, but you still got to catch them.
That's right. And that matters. That 50% looks a lot different, especially when you look at the yards, and I mean, one of them was on that crucial game-winning touchdown drive. That drive looks a lot different. He doesn't have to convert 4th and 16, most likely, if that catch is made. But that still comes down to Marcus Freeman was thinking about setting up for a field goal. And the one thing that I'll say maybe about his strategy right now, and analytics came up at his press conference this week, and he's talked about wanting, Estime to go down at the 1-yard line and use more clock and kick the field goal and stuff like that. And I think, and Vince, this is probably something that you and it's like, as a young head coach, when you're making those decisions for the first time, like I guess there's a difference between book knowledge and data and feel for the game. And I think that that's something that a lot of baseball managers, especially the old school guys, have had to go through as they've dealt with the influx of analytics for the last few years. And like, you look at a guy like Brandon Staley out there with the LA Chargers, and like, this is still a guy who is going to fall back to the analytics decision almost every time, rather than, you still have to trust your gut, to a great extent. And like, as we've talked about, there were none of us, I don't think, who wanted any part of a field goal try in a 1-point game to try to win that, especially if it was like, if Audric Estime had only gained 3 or 4 yards, that's going to be about a 43, 44-yard field goal if they just decide to go from there. And Marcus Freeman seemed content to do that. I think you still as a head coach have to trust your gut and what you're seeing from your players in the game, and not just go on, well, this is what the data tells me I should do. And I think that's still going to be a learning curve for Marcus Freeman, and things we're going to find out about Marcus Freeman, how much he's willing to kind of pull back on some of that analytics and trust his gut based on what he's seen.
Yeah, I think it has to be like the perfect combination of like book smarts and street smarts almost at the end of the day, right? Like, how are you combining the two to make the decisions? And look, I have no issue with looking at the data and using it as kind of like a guideline or a template. But like you said, at some points you just have to, what data doesn't take into account or analytics is just like you were saying, the feel of the game, the momentum of the game, and really, the feel that you have for your kicker overall.
Absolutely. Do you guys have any concern with the offense after seeing them score 35 total points over the last 2 games? After going into Ohio State, they had been over 40 points in every game.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that it's like, you want your offense to always, put up the numbers and get touchdowns and have so many, even if you have successful drives that are ending in field goals, you just want to see points, right? And that's the main thing. But like I said just a little bit ago, this is, to me, the toughest window that they're going to play in terms of, defense over the next 8 quarters. But, what you now have to look into account is now they're back on the road. It's another night game, and then they're going to be at home against, one of their biggest rivals and one of the teams that has the biggest implications on the rest of their season. So I think you don't necessarily need to get caught up in what we have or haven't done offensively the last 2 games. I think you just need to reset. And like Marcus Freeman says, we focus on it one play at a time, 1 week at a time. But I'd be lying if I said that, overall, I wanted to see more offensive production. And that's just because of, how well the defense has played overall. You want to help your defense in these close games, because they're just not going to get a stop every time. And then, in these close games, and as they get later down the road, those stops that they do or don't get defensively are just more amplified, just depending on what the offense is or isn't doing as well. So, has it been as good as I've been wanting it to be? No, but I think it'll get better. And I think, again, they've played their toughest stretch. That's in the past now.
Well, and we've seen this offense be good, right? I mean, we've seen them average over 40 points a game. We've seen them be successful. We've seen Sam Hartman make plays. We've seen we've seen every offensive player at some point or another make plays on a consistent basis. The issue I think we all have, let me finish that first point. We've seen them all make plays, so we're not like wishing upon a star that the offense is going to get better. You know what I mean?
We've seen the better.
We've seen it. We've seen it this year, right? And we've seen Jared Parker be incredibly creative with the offense. We've seen Sam Hartman just playing chess when everybody else is playing checkers. Like, we've seen all of this. Now, you hope that last week was a one-off. I mean, that's what you hope as a fan. You hope that it was a one-off. The offensive line played terrible. They only had 3 wide receivers, and they didn't. One of the 3 didn't play very well, and one was a true freshman who made freshman mistakes. Like, I'm not going to say Rico Flores didn't play well, because I thought he played fine. Just made some freshman mistakes, right? And so I think that you just hope that, okay, guys, we got to flush this last one. Yes, we won, but like offensive line, you can't play like that again. Like, all 5 offensive linemen didn't play well. Joe Alt got beat around the corner that one play, and I realize it's one play, but like, that doesn't happen to Joe Alt. You know what I mean? Like, the other 4 guys had their worst game of the year. All 5 of them had their worst game of the year. No matter how you measure it or whatever, they all had their worst game. So you hope that this is a one-off. They can kind of regroup, get back together. And again, it's tough. 4 night games in a row, 2 of which are on the road. Like, all of those things all factor in. There's no doubt about it. Now you're getting these wide receivers back. I think, I'm hoping that Jared Parker learns from this. Marcus Freeman learns from this. They can rebound and all of that. But it is there's still a piece of my mind that's like, okay, we've seen the offense at its worst. We've seen the offense at its best. We need to find a happy medium someplace, hopefully more so towards the best.
I think we're going to see an improvement this week, simply because of the fact that, again, it's like anytime – we get these games that they're all one-off situations, right? Like, as you go through the week, you get a game, we react to it all week. We start to talk about the next game, then we're going to react to that one the next week. Most of the focus that we have is always going to be on the team recovering. And that's, of course, Notre Dame from our perspective. We don't give nearly as much credit, I think, to the other team that they're playing, for causing some of the things. Now, we know that some things were self-inflicted, like drop balls, penalties, some of the mental things and stuff like that. We know a lot of that was self-inflicted. You clean that up, it's different. But the other side is still like Ohio State and Duke are both top 10 scoring defenses in the country. Ohio State's number 2, Duke is number 7. They combine to allow less than 20 points per game. So, like, if you want to look at it on the bright side, the 35 points based on what those two teams allow, Notre Dame has actually scored almost double what those two teams allow, Again, not absolving anything, because if Notre Dame adjusts a little bit better, plays a much more clean game, like half as many penalties, especially the false start type stuff, and makes a play here or there, they left some points out there on the field. We know that they can be better. So I'm not completely absolving them for what they did against these two teams, but I'm still at least willing to look and say, look, these were two really good defenses. They played a part in causing some of what Notre Dame was not able to do against them. So I think that just kind of by natural progression, the fact that they're not going to see any defenses that are as good as what they just played in this 2-game stretch, that it is going to get better naturally.
That's a good point.
In terms of this game, Louisville, the ACC regular season winning streak now is at 30 games, and Notre Dame trying to make it 31 as this thing continues. As you look at this streak, is there any downside to it, you think? And I'm interested to see kind of what your takes on this might be.
Honestly, I hadn't really thought about a downside. I mean, it's added pressure, I guess, would be the only downside. Like, you don't want to be the team that loses that first game and breaks the streak, like that kind of a thing. Like, I guess I get that part, but like depending on certain streaks, like when there's a streak out there and and that streak was started by, guys that aren't there anymore. Right.
Right.
Like the high school that I'm at, they had an amazing streak where they in conference, right, for that lasted like 20 years. And that team that lost that streak,
they're always the one that's going to be stuck with it. Yep.
You know what I mean? And so this is a little bit different, obviously. It's not quite that long, but at the same time, you don't want to be that team that loses that streak. You know what I mean? And so that would be the downside as far as I can tell. Other than that, they just got to go out and win. I don't know how important it is to them. I think it's more important to us than it is to the team.
Let me just throw, because you guys know that I'm the anti-conspiracy theory guy. I always kind of like, whatever, but after seeing the way these games have been called, and with all the conference realignment stuff that's going on, and like Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner, was at the game last week, and just all this, like, I'm starting to think that maybe there is like an ACC, like an internal ACC anti-Notre Dame thing. Like when you look at it, like, and I saw people floating around the number of penalties that have been called on Notre Dame versus the ACC opponents that they've played. It wouldn't be the first time that there has actually been, like internal, like the stuff with the NBA a few years back. I would not be completely shocked if there is an ACC agenda. It's like this winning streak has to end at some point. You know what I mean? Like, I just. Well, again, I'm not the conspiracy theory guy, but I do wonder if there's something to it as this winning streak continues now at 30 and whatever it ends up being, that like maybe the ACC, there might not be an official memo that's gone out, but there might be an unofficial one.
I mean, it doesn't look good for the ACC when its best team isn't even a part of the conference, or its most successful team isn't technically a part of the conference. But, to me, the ACC can kick rocks because Notre Dame is still bringing in revenue, and that's really all that should matter to them is what the revenue numbers compared to everyone else. So, they can get over. I don't think there's really a downside to the 30-win thing, and I don't even think the players know it, or, the coaches might know of it, but it's not something that they're like, quote unquote bulletin board material or something that they use to pump the guys up. It's just another game of going out there. And so, unfortunately it's going to end, but like, it's such an impressive streak at it whenever it does end. Right. And so I just don't think that there's really anything negative at this point. I don't think anyone's going to like the next day, the media is going to be like, oh, Notre Dame finally lost after, X amount of straight games. It's just, it's just one of those nice things that has naturally started to accumulate over the years. And I really don't see a downside if they eventually lose.
By the way, I feel like Jesse is doing his gym dance. Hello, friends. On the ninth hole.
I just hope my volume is still good. I'm really kind of scared. Like that guy that came to the window was kind of like creepy looking, and it was. I thought he was gonna give me like one of these afterwards, like if I don't be quiet. So
this is just the lengths. This is the lengths for our viewers and listeners. The lengths that IB is willing to go to bring you all this programming. We because of schedules and just different things, it's actually Jesse's in California as we're doing this, and it is
early in the morning.
It's what, maybe 4:30 in the morning now, something like that. Is that?
Yeah, it is. We're around 4:30 in the morning.
You don't want to wake up Big Brutus at 4:30 in the morning.
I know.
Let's it's like it's loud out here. I don't know. I mean, I know I'm loud, but like there's other loud stuff out here.
Let's talk a little about Louisville. That is the opponent. You got former Purdue head coach Jeff Brom in his first season there. Interesting quarterback that they're going to face in this game. Jack Plummer. It's going to be the third straight year that he's played Notre Dame with a third different team. He was with Purdue 2 years ago. He was with Cal last year. And now, of course, he comes in here reunited with Brom, who was, again, the head coach at Purdue. He and Brom are reunited rather with Louisville. Here's Marcus.
Confusing, and we're gonna try to give him some different looks, but it is hard confused because he's seen everything, right? You're talking about there's no substitution for experience, so he's seen a lot of different things defensively, and he makes decisions quickly, and that's the one thing that I've noticed even just watching him through these couple games at Louisville is that, man, he's making fast decisions. He knows exactly where he's going with the ball, and he's doing a good job of putting it where it needs to be. So we got to be good in our pre-snap disguises and try to give him some different looks, and not just give him one or two looks, and try to get him to hold it a little bit. And if we can get him to hold it, then we're going to try to get pressure on him and try to affect him that way.
He's got some interceptions already. He had 2 last week in their narrow win, 13-10 over North Carolina State. He had a couple earlier this season against Murray State as well. I mean, they do have an explosive offense. They're second in the nation in plays of 30-plus yards. They lead the nation in plays of 40-plus yards this season. They run the ball pretty well as well with Jahar Jordan. Vince, what do you think of this Louisville offense?
There's a couple national pundits out there that think that Louisville should be favored. So I think that's interesting.
It's just crazy the way the whole cycle works.
I had to bring
you
it
get
up.
late in the week and it's like time to bring up I'm not mad at you, but it's like, okay, here come the hot takes now. Here we go.
I know, ridiculous. But anyway, if you're telling me that their best attribute is offense, then I say bring it on against Notre Dame's defense. Like I have complete faith after last week and the week before, to be honest, outside, in the last drive. Yeah, okay, I get it. But I have complete faith in this defense. And I also have complete faith that Jack Plummer is going to throw the ball directly to Notre Dame a couple times. And this offense has something to prove, meaning Notre Dame's offense has something to prove after the last couple of weeks. And Louisville's defense is not good. They're not good.
Right.
And so if they turn the ball over to Notre Dame and you give Notre Dame good field position, this game's going to be over quick. I know that sounds very pro Notre Dame, but if you just look at the matchups, Jack Plummer is not a great quarterback. Yes, he's got Louisville undefeated, but I don't think it's because of him. You know what I mean? I've never been impressed with him. I just haven't been. And I think they're going to be able to get pressure on him. I think they're going to be able to force him into some mistakes. And you've got to have a run game in order to sustain a good passing game. Notre Dame's proven they're going to shut down a run game.
He really leans on play action. Jesse, that's
Yeah.
something we talked about earlier this week. He needs that play action and the threat of that run game to really make the passing game go.
Yeah, I'm just not worried.
Yeah, so like if you start looking at some of the, the Jake Plummer stats over the season, right? Like he's thrown an interception in every game except his Boston College game. He's got 6 interceptions in 5 games. So, he averages about an interception per game. That's really not great. And you start looking at his QBR, it's about, middle of the nation in terms of ranking. He had one standout game against Boston College, nearly thrown for 400 yards and 5 touchdowns. But it's like, come on, that's Boston College. Everyone can kind of, beat up on Boston College. And then, you start looking at the games as a whole. They barely snuck out a win against Georgia Tech. They dominated Murray State, barely snuck out a game against IU, battled out with Boston College, and then again snuck out another game against North Carolina State. I think the thing with Jack Plummer is you just got to shut down their run game because it'll cut his game majority down because of what you talked about, the play action pass. That's his bread and butter. That's how he wants to run the offense. So I think as long as you shut down the run game, Jack Plummer's nothing to be worried about. And if you force a couple of turnovers, you're really going to have things going your way.
Yeah, I mean, in the 2 games that he's played against Notre Dame, to his credit, he hasn't turned the ball over. But Notre Dame has sacked him 8 times in those games, including 6 last year against. Now, granted, again, just like with Sam Hartman, he's on a different team, because you've got some of the national people saying, well, the wrong team is favored in this game. It should be Louisville, whatever. And then you've got these Louisville people who are trolling Sam Hartman, calling him a turnover machine for some reason, even though it's like, okay, what he had like one mediocre game at Louisville a couple years ago. And now all of a sudden he's a turnover machine, whatever. It is interesting, though, when you look at a guy like Howard Cross, who had the monster game against Duke last week and 13 tackles last week against Duke. His previous big game, 11 tackles, blowing up the Cal offensive line when Jack Plummer was the quarterback there. He was a wrecking machine in that game against Jack Plummer and the Golden Bears. And I agree, their offensive line is not that good. Their defense is not that good as well. So I don't see this being, like you look at Notre Dame's secondary, they've contended with the best set of receivers they're going to see. I realize these guys are good, Thrash and Huggins, Bruce. I'm not trying to take anything away from them. Those guys are good, but they're not Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka in that crew.
Exactly. Yep, that's exactly right. It's a completely different scenario. It is, as Jesse said earlier, Notre Dame's not going to face, or I think it was Jesse, it's early, said, they played their best 2 defenses that they're going to play, right? I mean, and this offense is ready to take back off again. And they're going to need to, obviously, because we've talked about it a million times. 35 points in 2 games is not going to win you a national championship. And I realize we're a ways away from a national championship, but you got to score points. Right. You have to score points. Defense can get you there, but once you're there, you've got to be able to score points against good defenses. So they need to get their swagger back a little bit. I think this is the perfect game to do that.
Guys, are you ready for rapid fire?
Let's freaking go, baby.
Woo!
Let's talk about Howard Cross. 13 tackles last week in the win over Duke. Most in the nation for a defensive lineman. Howard Cross is blank.
Howard Cross is phenomenal and extremely underrated in terms of, his national attention. I talked about this earlier in the week. Howard Cross is undersized for his position if we're talking about traditional, defensive tackles. But the thing that he's good at is he makes up with just elite strength and just elite, to me, like lateral quickness, like the way that he can use his lateral speed to get past these defenders, or use these quick hand swipes to get past the defenders. And even if the play isn't directly run at him, He can laterally move down the line and make plays. So and just a really good tackler too. Like I don't think I've seen Howard Cross miss many tackles as well. So I just think he's largely underrated in the country and really in this defense because like we've really seen Howard Cross and Baptiste step up recently, and I think it makes everyone's game behind him at the second and third level just that much easier. So I just think he's underappreciated.
He's a dog. He's a dog, Stires boys. Like, if anybody, like we knew he was good, right? I mean, we all knew that Howard Cross was good, but he's played great. And he has solidified that defensive line where people had a lot of question marks coming into this year on what the defensive line was going to be able to do, specifically in the middle, right? And he has made that interior of the defensive line something that I don't think we got to worry about because Riley Mills is playing well and Howard Cross is playing the best, but he's bringing those guys right along with him. And so he's just playing like a dog, man. Jesse's right. He's undersized. Probably wasn't getting a lot of looks from NFL teams, but like you can't ignore the stats he's putting up, the production that he's putting up. I mean, he got like a mantle full of trophies this past week for what he did against Duke. I mean, all these player of the week honors from all these different organizations. I mean, the kid is opening up some eyes. And if he can continue doing this, his draft stock is going through the roof.
Totally underappreciated, especially before last week's game. And I mean, like to look and sit back, see him get 13 tackles, that's one thing. And then you look at the stat sheet and it's like, oh, now this guy is leading his team in tackles for the season. You don't see a nose guard leading your team in tackles 6 games into the season. Maybe he gets some, like against the triple option against Navy or whatever, because, they're running the fullback more than they should or whatever it happens to be. But it's like we were sitting here, and it's been a thing this season. Was this what exactly did Al Golden want from this defensive line? Did he want true disruption from this defensive line? Well, we've seen it now with Howard Cross. We're not talking about Jason Onye nearly as much either. We're seeing a lot more Howard Cross. He had to be out there and he had to give them what they got from him last week against Duke. So again, I think for the entirety of the season, still underappreciated. It blows up when you see 13 tackles and now he's leading the team, but just a great performance from Howard Cross last week. Fill in the blank. It's blank that with Louisville joining the top 25 this week, the Irish are now set to face 4 consecutive teams that are undefeated and ranked for the first time since 2000.
That's pretty shocking, actually. Like, that's not what I would have guessed going into the season, looking at this 4-game stretch. I would not have believed that, number one, they'd all be ranked. Number two, that they'd all be undefeated. No chance. I know. So I'm pretty shocked that that's the case. But what a great opportunity for Notre Dame to look. They're a top 10 team. They don't need to, rustle up any, support necessarily, but they're going to get it if they take care of business the rest of the way.
Yeah, I find this to be electrifying just because, I like to I like to have my team battle tested throughout the season, right? And this is the biggest chunk of the season for Notre Dame right now. And, it would be nice to have a cupcake schedule and, play Bowling Green and some, mid-level to bottom tier Big Ten teams and, whatever it might be. But let me put it like this. I'd hate to face an 11-1 Notre Dame team at the end of the season after the schedule they face, maybe more so compared to these other teams, by the time they get to the end of the season. It's just because of, their maturity. Not only are you playing tough games, but like your team has been through some tougher moments and found ways to kind of win when your back is against the wall. So to me, I like it. It's electrifying. It makes me feel stronger about my team. And again, if you're a Notre Dame fan, I would feel good going into, if Notre Dame can handle what they're supposed to the rest of the season. I like my chances of this team maybe compared to the other teams because they're tested. They've played this kind of window throughout the season.
And I should clarify, of course, USC would be the 4th team next week. So technically, it's not for sure that that it's going to be 4 straight unbeaten teams. It'll at least be 4 straight ranked teams because even if USC somehow were to get upset by Arizona this week, they're still going to be ranked. They wouldn't be unbeaten. But I was definitely assuming that USC is going to beat Arizona as part of that question. But hey. Tell me again why Notre Dame needs to join a conference. Again, as I've said before, like what problem does it solve? Like everyone acts like Notre Dame is getting over somehow by not being in a conference, but look at the two premier games in this stretch between Ohio State 2 weeks ago and USC coming up next week. Notre Dame doesn't have to play either one of those, but they're on the schedule. And, even though the ACC is perceived as a bad conference, they're always going to have one or two of these teams. You're not necessarily going to expect that it's going to be Louisville and Duke at the same time, but they're always going to have some of these teams pop up. They're going to pose a much bigger challenge to Notre Dame than most people think. So, again, it's just get off my lawn with your Notre Dame needs to be in a conference thing. It's just old and tired, and look at where Notre Dame is with this stretch. So after being flagged for targeting in the second half last week, Jordan Botelho, of course, is going to have to miss the first half of this week's game against Louisville. Scale of 1 to 10, what's your concern with that?
I would put my concern at a solid 3 or 4, nothing too crazy. And the only reason I say that is Notre Dame has depth across the defensive line. And I would say that Jordan Botelho, while he's a good player, he's not an elite kind of standout type player. He's not, a guy that's a first-round draft pick or anything like that. So, I just think that the gap between, Batello and the next man up isn't overly large to be concerned about. And I think Notre Dame will do enough, again, with their depth and how they've rotated players before. They'll be just fine.
I'm going to put it at a solid 2. I'm going to put it at a 2 for the same reason that Jesse just said. I think this is a great opportunity for the young guys, Josh Burnham, Tui Alamaka, to get over there, make some plays. I don't think they've gotten enough opportunities, to be perfectly honest with you. And they're going to get the whole first half between the two of them to really show what they've got. I think you're going to get at least one sack out of that duo in the first half. And
half.
Yeah. Yep. I think Batello has been a little bit disappointing based on what we hoped.
I agree. That was
exactly.
going to be where I was going to go with this. I think it's fair to say Jordan Botelho has been disappointing so far. Like a guy with his talent and his ability, some of the stuff that we saw from him as a reserve last year, we just haven't seen that so far from him as a starting player this season. I mean, they've got 9 sacks. He's got 2 of them. So other than saying he's the sack leader, my concern level is a 2 as well. I think that this is a big opportunity for Burnham. He's going to get to start this game and a big opportunity for Tui Alamaka to show himself in reserve as well. So I'm not overly concerned. And that's really unfortunate because we've all been waiting for Jordan Botelho, and he's had it. This is his time to show what he can go out and do. And we just haven't seen enough of that. Consistency's been the biggest thing from him, and it's still something that we're looking for from him right now. So there was a lot of Kirk Herbstreit hate after he called last week's Notre Dame Duke game. Fair or foul, you guys?
I'm going to get a lot of hate for this. I think it's a little foul, to be honest with you. And I know, Brian came on the post-game show, and he's like, now I understand. I had to watch an away game broadcast. He's terrible. He's horrible. As I was watching the game, he didn't bother me. I don't know. Now maybe the bar is set very low, but I felt like he explained the game to people in a pretty positive way. I didn't. Yes, there was a Duke spin, but that was happening since game day. Okay, get over it. I have no problem with that. He was actually X's and O'ing a lot of things. He was on the whiteboard showing people what was going on. I didn't have an issue with it. I really didn't. I guess I know I'm in the minority. People are going to give me a lot of hate for that. It didn't bother me.
He's an easy target. He's an easy target.
Just like Joe Buck, for example.
Yeah.
I love listening to Joe Buck, especially call baseball games, and he gets a lot of hate for it. So,
yeah, I think that the Kirk Herbstreit negative talk is also foul, Vince. And there's 2 reasons I think of it to be foul. One, I think Notre Dame fans have a pretty good preconceived notion, and I've been guilty of it too at times before, that Kirk Herbstreit is a Notre Dame hater, right? And so when you're a Notre Dame hater, or if you think someone's not a fan of your team, you become hypercritical, or you put him more so under the microscope of what he is, or isn't doing. I thought he did a great job in the game, and people are talking about the Audric Estime run. His job there is to let it breathe a little bit, right? Let the play kind of play out. And so, I think Notre Dame fans get caught up of kind of wanting these national media players to give them more praise, essentially. But, at the end of the day, it's well known that Kirk Herbstreit is a Notre Dame cheerleader, but I don't think he goes out of his way to say negative things or not say good things about Notre Dame.
Yeah, it's foul to me, and the biggest foul, I think he did a good enough job during the game. I do wonder if he is stretched a little bit too thin right now.
I think he is.
I was watching him on the NFL game last night, and Sean Davis was complimenting him when Sean was on the show with me, and I just don't feel like he's hitting, especially for an NFL now. Like if I talk about his NFL specifically, I don't think that he is hitting nearly critically enough in an NFL game for you can definitely call players out more, and you should as an analyst call players out more.
He calls it like a college game.
Yeah, exactly. Where it's fairly innocuous at times. And
in the NFL, it just seems like he's like, oh, okay, yeah, this is fun, da 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 da. But yeah, there needs to be more seriousness to it,
right? And specific to last week against Duke, I think the biggest thing that shocked me is the amount of Notre Dame people who are mad at him because he didn't start yakking as soon as Audric Estime scored the touchdown, and Jesse hit it in that moment. That's a big moment in the game. Both announcers laid out, which is what you would want an announcer to do in that situation. You don't want them to start yakking all over it. You want to let the picture tell the story, the natural crowd noise tell the story. It was amazing to me, how big the Notre Dame, the cheer was actually in Duke's home stadium when Audric Estime scored that touchdown. So I don't have a problem with what are there things that, that you could sit there and nitpick? Sure, but I think that in general, how what my stance has always been on this kind of stuff. I just think that the announcers for these games get too much venom directed at them to begin with, because what they mostly want is a good game, and they got a great game. And I think Herbstreit and Reese Davis, who was filling in on that game for Fowler because Fowler was in London calling the NFL game, I thought that they both did a solid enough job. And in that moment, I felt like their decision to lay out met the moment. That's what you want from an announcer. Yep. He shouldn't have had to go overboard in his praise for Audric Estime or Notre Dame in that instance.
I have never understood the fan reaction to what they believe the lean is for the announcers.
Right.
I don't care. Root for whoever you like. Yes, I realize you're supposed to be neutral. It's a national game. I get all of that, and I understand it, and that is the way it should be. If they're leaning one way or the other, as long as my team wins, I don't care. That does not bother me. I guess I'm not bothered as much by announcers as some people are. I don't care who announces the game. I mean, unless
I'll turn it down or mute it sometimes. That's how much I care about it.
Herbstreit is still better than what NBC has had for Notre Dame home games for the last couple years, right?
1,000%.
Wouldn't you take that?
Yes.
For all the Jason Garrett haters, especially.
Unless a guy is just butchering names, calling different people, just completely just flubbing everything. It just doesn't bother me. I don't know. It doesn't bother me.
What do you guys think about this? There's reported Michigan State interest in Urban Meyer. Meyer, of course, is denying that there's any interest. What do you guys think of this situation?
I think it's always something to talk about, and I think if you're Michigan State, you put yourself out there that you're this desirable school, right? It's kind of like propaganda, or to me, it's kind of like propaganda to maybe some of the other coaches out there that, if Urban Meyer's interested, then Michigan State has to be a desirable destination. I don't think that Urban Meyer would ever coach a team in Michigan. And I definitely don't think he'd coach for Michigan State. So I think it's just good propaganda on their end. I think you're going to entice more people or get more interest from people if you can put a label that, Urban Meyer is interested, or that he has some sort of inklings of being connected to the team.
I agree with everything you said, except for the fact that he wouldn't coach in Michigan. I don't think he gives a rip where he's coaching if he wants to get back in the game, as long as the price is
right.
right.
That's right, baby.
He has no loyalty to Ohio State.
Come on, Bob Barker.
I can promise you that. He doesn't have any loyalty. He doesn't care about any of that. And I can tell you who doesn't want him to get that job. Jim Harbaugh and Coach Day over at Ohio State. They are shaking in their boots if they think that this is accurate. So, look, if you're Michigan State, you shoot for the stars. And look, Urban Meyer has his fault, but they are well documented, right? And I don't know
but
that
he's
I would
a good football coach.
That bingo. If you're just talking X's and O's and recruiting and everything else, you shoot for the stars, man. You bring that guy in, and we know Michigan State doesn't worry about all the extracurriculars. So you want to get a good coach in there, and you're willing to pay, which clearly they are. I would 100% be blowing up his phone.
Yeah, and like his whole denial of this thing, you know, because there was like a local reporter who was reporting that Michigan State was interviewing him, and then the counter the next day was a national reporter saying, I've talked to Urban Meyer, and he says he's happy at Fox and he has no interest. Well, that doesn't confirm or deny whether or not he interviewed for the job, you know, and as people have aptly pointed out, we saw Urban Meyer when he was at Florida refuting any interest in Ohio State, and look how that turned out. We've seen Nick Saban when he was with the Miami Dolphins refute any interest with Alabama. Look how that turned out. The coaches are going to lie right up front, and they'll use the media as their mouthpiece to do it. And I'm not, you know, like, no qualms, you know, the reporter is reporting what information he's been giving. I have no qualms with that, but let's not be so naive as to think that just because Urban Meyer might say, I've got no interest, doesn't mean there's no interest, because if the price is right and he decides he wants back in coaching, he'll get back into coaching. The question is going to be what situation. Michigan State's got to dig themselves out of a huge PR nightmare, and it would be a home run for them to go out and get Urban Meyer because of who he is and the stature that he has.
Well, I think it would wipe away the bad taste that people have about Urban Meyer and Jacksonville, and then you wipe away the bad taste of Michigan State. It's kind of like both parties are getting, you know, a clean not a clean slate, but the opportunity to kind of, you know, put it in the past, get people to start thinking about other things.
Fill in the blank. It's blank that Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark will reportedly not be at the Texas-Oklahoma Red River game this weekend, but SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey will be there.
Sour grapes. he doesn't want to go, you know, to the dance with the ones that are leaving them. So he's just not even going to show up. You know what I mean? And SEC, they're like, okay, this is what we're about to get. You know,
he's a preview.
Excited. He is fired up. So of course he's going to be there. But Big 12, he's like, you know what? You guys decided not to be here. I'm not showing up either. I don't blame them, but it is a little sour grapes.
Oh, Vince, I 100% agree. It's a huge pity party type situation, and that's exactly what it is. And I just kind of find it, you know, when this stuff happens, I just like to chuckle and laugh, because, like you said, it's like the SEC's guy showing up, and he's like, man, I can't wait. It's like the envious ex, right? Like you still like maybe you're the girl that you used to talk to is talking to another guy that's, you know, within the same circle. You're not going to show up and put yourself through that and see that what's going on in front of you. So I think that's exactly what this situation is.
Like, are you going to show up at the wedding of your ex? You know, that kind of thing.
Exactly, and that's kind of what it feels like to me.
It's SEC takeover of Dallas, and they've been wanting it, and they're getting it. And it is kind of a, you know, I don't know about a going away party, but it's some kind of party. I'll be curious to see, like, if Brett Yormark shows up, you know, at the Pac-12 championship game, you know, if a couple of members of his conference, or even one member of his, you know, new conference coming up next year were to end up in the Pac-12 championship game, or, you know, would the Big Ten, you know, just show up out there if it ends up being USC against Washington or something like that. But yeah, it is definitely sour grapes, and Yormark wants none of these. He has not hidden his displeasure with Texas and Oklahoma and the fact that they're heading off to the SEC. So it is kind of funny. Let's get through some of these props. We're going to have to kind of fly through them here at the end, because again, we're up against a little bit of a time crunch today. Notre Dame minus 6.5. Some people think that the wrong team is favored. Do you like Notre Dame minus 6.5 in this game?
I love Notre Dame minus 6.5. They backdoor covered on that 2-point conversion last week. Actually, no,
they didn't.
No, for me,
All
they
they did was
backdoor
kick the extra
covered.
point, Jesse. Come on now.
All they did was backdoor cover for
You know,
me.
that's
I
something we didn't
apologize.
even discuss when we talked about Audric Estime scoring that touchdown.
Well,
the fact that it was a -5.5 game, and if they kick the field goal, they're not going to cover that. You know, not that that Audric was playing for that, but I'm just
no, you're right
made
about that.
Made a lot of bettors happy who had Notre Dame. Let's put it that way.
You're 100%
100%.
accurate on that. But there's a lot of people that were really bad at math. They're like, "Why did he go for 2? He wouldn't have covered." Like, no, just had to kick the extra point. Like,
right.
I guess what I was getting at is the spread is 1 point better against a least favorable team or a lesser team, and so I think there'll be no issues with the spread.
Yeah,
they're definitely going to cover. I mean, I have no qualms about that, and the fact that we heard that the wrong team is favored just blows my mind when it's 6.5 points. I mean, that's a full touchdown, but I think they're going to win by multiple touchdowns. So I would easily take Notre Dame to cover that.
The over-under is 54.5 points. I think we were all pounding overs last week, and it ended up being a big under. You think it goes over this week? The defense for Louisville, obviously, as we've said, not nearly as good as what Notre Dame's seen the last 2 weeks.
This is always hard for me because Notre Dame's defense is really good, and so even if Notre Dame scores 40 points and Louisville manages to squeak out 10 or 13, you're still at the under. So I just have to follow the math on this one, and Notre Dame's, the defense is going against a lesser of an offense, and so I'm going to take the under because I think Notre Dame will do just fine, but the other part of the equation isn't going to hold up their bargain.
This is a tough one for me because of exactly what Jesse said. I was thinking I was going to stay away from this one, but obviously we got to pick one way or the other. I would pick the under. I think the defense is going to come out and play a lot better than a lot of people think. I don't feel like Louisville is going to be able to exploit the 40-plus yard plays that they've been able to exploit against other defenses because Notre Dame's secondary is just better than that. They're not going to give up those plays. I don't see it. So I don't think they're going to hold up their end of the bargain like Jesse said. So I would take the under here. I do think the offense is going to put some points on the board. So if they go crazy, they're going to put a bunch of points up. So it could very well go over, but I'm going to go with the under.
Based on my score prediction, I'm going over, but this is one that I would stay away from in terms of Vegas, like actually betting it this week. I'd like to see like what happens in this game, I think is going to tell us much more about what Notre Dame is going to be the rest of the season than necessarily what we saw the last couple of games against those better defenses that they've been facing. Sam Hartman, over under 245.5 yards and 1.5 touchdown passes.
I'm going to take the over on both of these. I think this is a big Sam Hartman bounce back game. I think you're going to see the offense and the passing game clicking just a little bit more. I don't trust that Louisville secondary. And these are just, right around Sam Hartman's numbers all year, and so I think he's been back-to-back games of unders on these after being nothing but overs on the first couple. I'd like his chances of getting back on track against a not nearly as good Louisville offense.
Yeah, I mean, I think run game and the pass game are going to do some good things, but 245 yards. I like the over there, and if he's going to throw for over 250, then he's going to throw for more than one touchdown. So I would take the over as well.
Yeah, I went over on the 1.5 touchdown passes last week, and we all got burned on that. If you dropped anything, that was part of a couple of my parlays. I think I like the over on the passing yards as well. I agree. I think this is a bounce back. I'll take the over on both. Plummer has 235.5 yards, the Louisville quarterback, and this is a tough one for me. What do you guys think?
I think it is tough, and I'd stay away from it just because of he's not a great thrower. But if the game starts to get kind of a little bit not out of reach, but if in the fourth quarter, if it's a multi-possession, 3-possession, 2-possession game, they're not going to waste any clock trying to run, and so it's going to be a lot of not garbage time, but kind of make up yards in my opinion. So
little rapid fire here. We gotta get going on these. We gotta wind down.
I'm gonna go with the under just for fun. I don't think he's that great, but I fear the garbage time stuff.
Okay.
The run game going to be non-existent, so they're going to have to throw the ball. He's going to
That's what I think.
He's going to back into the over, but I'll take the under on touchdown passes.
Mitchell Evans, 50.5 yards, just over under.
Under.
Yeah, under.
Due for some regression.
I'm going under as well if I have to, just because of the fact you're going to have a full complement of receivers out there.
Yep.
Jamari Thrash for Louisville, 78.5 yards.
That's a
I'm gonna go
lot.
under.
They're not going to let one kid do that under.
I think maybe one guy, because of maybe a couple of, again, I don't think they're going to have the 30, 40-yard plays, but maybe a couple 20-yard, that kind of thing. But I would still hedge under as well. Tyree, 27.5. I'm going over for him.
Over.
All of those low numbers for him are great because that's always just one catch.
Tobias, 30.5 yards.
Wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
I wouldn't.
Yeah.
Either.
Give me
Yep.
the under, though. He's not in a good space right now.
Jawar Jordan rushing yards, 75.5 yards.
You could set this at 45.5, and I would take the under.
I think the team's going to be lucky to have that.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to give the under as well.
All right. Estebe, 96.5.
He breaks
Give me
one
that
long
over.
one that goes over, but I would take the under.
I'd say over just because he's hit it in like every game, but like one, it feels like. So give me the over.
Yeah, the last one.
Yeah. I'm not touching Audric this week.
I think there's a good chance he's going to get some rest this week.
That's what, because I think maybe we do see more of the other backs, like Jeremiah Love getting a lot of love from everybody. All right, game prediction, real quick, 10 seconds or less.
31-13 Notre Dame. Offense gets back on track. Sam Hartman looks good. Running game is enough, and defense continues to what it's been doing all year, limiting confusing quarterbacks with coverage, confusing quarterbacks with stunts. I think that trend continues against Louisville.
Easy for me. I'm going 42-13. I'm not picking field goals for Notre Dame anymore. This is straight 7-point scores. 42-13.
I've got Notre Dame 35-20. I think that similarly to the North Carolina State game, Louisville's last touchdown is more or less, like a garbage type touchdown.
A limp over the finish line.
That kind of thing. My initial instinct was 17. I've been picking 17 for the last few opponents.
I know,
so I went
right?
I went a little bit higher with 20 again, figuring out, they'll kind of throw it around at the end after Notre Dame's got a comfortable lead and end up with 20. So that's where I'm going there. All right, guys, appreciate it. We're going to wrap it up right now. For Vince, for Jesse, I'm Sean. We will talk to you Monday on IB Nation Sports Talk. This has been IB Countdown to Kickoff.